Accountability. If there's one thing holding the Pelicans back more than injuries, depth, coaching, it's absolutely accountability. Without it, every problem on this roster is just going to repeat itself. It's today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Wednesday, a game day for your New Orleans Pelicans. They're taking on the Denver Nuggets. I'm a little bit nervous about this one as well. We're not going to focus on the game. I want to focus on, in the beginning part of the show, accountability. This is something that the Pelicans very, very much are lacking here. And until they add that into the building here, and this goes for everybody, nothing's really going to change. And the good news is you can do this in a variety of different ways immediately starting tonight against the Denver Nuggets. We'll break down accountability. I also want to look at this team trying to find out what their identity is because there are conflicting messages about this. This also ties into accountability. We're going to look at what is the team's identity, and are they actually working towards that? And then how can you make it's on the, if you're looking at the show here, it says like ways to make the season a success. And I realize that's actually poorly worded. It should just be ways to make the season not a complete failure. We're going to cover it all in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. You can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network. So let's get into it. Accountability. This team is not going to blow things up today. I thought about doing the show of like, what does blowing it up look like? What does a complete rebuild look like? We'll save that because this team's not blowing it up today. You will do that maybe closer to the trade deadline in this off season. So no trades get done now. So at this point in time, you just need accountability. That's going to be the most important thing for this team because you may as well try and win, hold some of these players accountable, and figure out who you got. This is how you determine who's on the team next year. And you're going to do that by trying to win, and guys that aren't adding to that, maybe you don't play. But I think it starts more so with Zion Williamson here. Zion Williamson needs to be held accountable more so than he is. And maybe you can't hold him accountable. Maybe there's just not a way to get him to respond to that, right? You know, when you are held accountable, you're going to kind of think about your actions, own your actions, not make excuses, and more importantly, commit to changing things and approaching things differently. And that applies to any sort of job role that you're in. That's what it means, right? And if you can't get Zion Williamson to do that, it says you can't keep going forward with him. I don't know if they've determined whether or not they're going to build around Zion Williamson more. They seem to commit to him this offseason. Maybe that was because there was no value for him. Maybe they truly believed it. But one of the things is accountability. And I'm thinking about it with this injury that he has right now, the hamstring injury that has kept him out. He's been listed as questionable for the past 2 games. Now, you don't want to rush someone back from injury, particularly Zion Williamson with that hamstring that has been a reoccurring injury over the past couple of years. But if he can play, he should be playing. And I think at this point, there's people questioning whether he could or not. More so than ever, there are questions about his commitment to wanting to play basketball and to do the work and put in the effort. He says he loves basketball. But if you're questionable, in theory, that means you're 50-50 to this game. We won't get clear answers on this. No team will give you clear answers on this of who's making the determination for these past 2 games that he's not playing. And I'm sure he'll be listed as questionable or one of those for this game tonight against the Denver Nuggets. But you've got to determine if you're playing or not. And if it's the team holding him out, that's one thing. But if it's Zion holding himself out, that's a big part of the problem. When you looked at this game against the Oklahoma City Thunder, Saddiq Bey, listed as questionable as well. He didn't end up playing. But I guarantee you that if Zion Williamson was playing through injury and leading by example, others would follow like that too. You need that leadership from him. And he hasn't delivered on that. And if he's not going to deliver on that, if he's not going to do what you need him to do, then, and I'm going to sneeze here, hold on. Sorry. Got the mute button now, which is nice. You need to hold him accountable if he doesn't. The good news is you can try and figure out if this is something that's possible right now. Going into this season, it was reported by HoopsHype that James Borrego took over Zion Williamson's player development role this year. They kind of always have a coach that they work with on that. And that Zion Williamson, I'm going to sneeze again. Oh, okay, it's dusty in here. And that Zion Williamson has responded well to James Borrego. So if that's the case, hold him accountable with it all, right? That's his guy. That guy's the head coach now. They've got to hold him accountable or get him to change. And if he doesn't, then it's time to move on. If Zion Williamson doesn't respond to Joe Dumars, and who knows if he has or not, it's time to move on. It's time to figure that out. But this also applies to other guys on the roster. It's not just Zion Williamson. You've got to try on defense, and this team isn't. We're going to talk more about this in the identity part of the show in the next segment here. Guys are not trying on defense. Then you should not play them. There needs to be some sort of message sent, even if you're sending it to the fans, that this isn't acceptable, that this isn't okay. It's a really important thing. What happens, right? If you don't try on defense, does it matter here? What is it? You're going to lose? More games than you're already losing? Who cares? Use this opportunity to send a message where if you lose, whatever, right? You're 2-12. Send a message to some of these players if they are not committed to what you're trying to do. You need to do that right now. And maybe that means when they get playing time again, they come back and they try harder. And it creates a level of accountability. This needs to apply to the coaching staff. It needs to apply to the front office. I don't quite know how you hold ownership accountable, but finding ways to kind of build this in needs to be the case. If Joe Dumars isn't making good decisions, if Troy Weaver isn't making good decisions, they need to change things. There's questions about both those guys, Weaver and Dumars, and how they approach things. There needs to be ways to hold them accountable for all of this. Otherwise, none of this is going to matter. If basically no one cares whether they do their job well or not, because there's no concerns, there's no worries, then you're going to end up 2-12 again next year. This needs to change. This ties to culture, something that they are very clearly lacking here and have not fixed overnight. And look, Joe Dumars might not fix it overnight. That's okay. We're not expecting necessarily complete change, but it also shows that what they've done isn't enough and they shouldn't be resting or thinking they've done a good job and patting themselves on the back with it. They need to find a way to hold this whole organization accountable. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Is it as simple as benching guys, do you think? Should it be trading players away that just don't fit in? But to hold guys accountable, you also need to know what standards to apply to them. And that gets into identity here. And I want to get into that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Skims. When Skims announced they were making underwear for men, the reaction was just made perfect sense. People have been talking about Skims for years. So most guys, though, stick to whatever they've been buying since college. Same fits, same waistbands that just roll. It doesn't look good here. Skims Men's changes that. One upgrade, and it's obvious why everyone's been talking about this. I'm wearing a pair of Skims Men's right now. This is all the underwear that I wear. They're awesome. They feel good. They fit right. They actually stay put. There's no slippage, no sagging, no anything. It's just generally great underwear that makes you feel confident and comfortable. I love the stretch 5-inch boxer brief. I'm flying a lot. I'm running from the arena to other things. Whatever it might be, I need something that is just comfy all day long that I can also go to wear to the gym, what have you. The fit, the fabric, it's soft, supportive, and comfortable to wear all day. And more importantly, they don't ride up. They don't lose their shape. They hit exactly where they're supposed to on my legs. I love it. Makes it easy whether you're traveling or working out. So Shop Skims Men's at skims.com, and when you place your order, choose podcast in the post-purchase survey and select our show from the drop-down menu to let them know that we sent you. Plus, the Skims holiday shop is open, so if you're looking for the perfect gift this season, Skims has you covered over at skims.com. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So even if you miss the start of a game or you want to ride a hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks, and you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It just keeps every game more exciting, especially if maybe the Pelicans turn it around and they can start making some pushes in the fourth quarter. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. And become an everydayer. It means you listen Monday through Friday. Programming note, it's my last week with y'all. Until December 15th. I'll be back. Getting married on Saturday. We're coming up. I'm going to finish out the week here with y'all. Then I'm going on my honeymoon. Going to actually unplug for maybe the first time in my life. Your second listen, by the way, should be Ross Jackson with Locked On Saints. He's one of the two officiants of the wedding. So there you go. We actually are very good friends in real life here. Dylan Sanders is going to have you covered starting on Monday. He'll be with you, and then I'll be taken back over. And I appreciate Dylan stepping in and covering Locked On Pelicans while I'm gone here. I appreciate all the kind words that everyone has said in the comments. That's very sweet of y'all. It makes me feel very, very loved, very honored to be with y'all. So I'm going to miss you, and I'll be back, though, and we're going to finish out the week. We got a couple more shows to do here. All right. Let's keep talking. Oh, by the way, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and the #1 sports podcast network. You know, we talked about kind of like accountability, and I think that's going to be important. You know, when you blow up this roster, if you make big changes to this roster, you've got to bring in the right kind of players, the players that are fit what you're doing. And that kind of comes down to identity. And you hear Joe Dumars talking a lot about this. In the firing of head coach Willie Green, he said, I didn't see an identity. I didn't see what we wanted. Does this team, though, actually know what their identity is? And when you say, like, I didn't see an identity, that's something you have to build towards, I think. You know, Joe Dumars talked a little bit about how the identity will naturally come out. It's not like you can, bring in all offensive players and be like, you are going to be a defensive team. And that doesn't quite work, right? You sometimes play to the team that you have, and your identity should be, some sort of mix of the players that you have and other things. And I think that's an important aspect of that. And in one sense, Joe Dumars is right. But a lot of his messaging has left me kind of confused, and I think others confused as well. And this comes from Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype, who's been kind of all over some of the Pelicans stuff recently. And that is, Joe Dumars has talked a lot about defense, competing, and all of that. But would you say he's brought in all of those type of players? Scotto put out the story that Joe Dumars was talking to the Pelicans, like college coaching staff or scouting staff and all of that, saying like, we want defensive guys that are going to like try hard, character guys, those sorts of things. Defense being one of them. And then immediately they find out after he leaves the room, the Jordan Poole trade is announced, and Jordan Poole doesn't exactly fit the defensive type of approach that you want. He doesn't help you in that regard. For this team to hold players accountable, in my opinion, they first kind of need to know what the standards are, what the expectations are. If you bring in guys that just aren't good defensive players, have never been, and you're like, you better be a good defensive player or you're not going to play, those things are kind of conflicting a little bit. I mean, yes, everyone should try on defense, but let's be realistic about it. That's not always how this goes. So before you even can hold some of the players accountable, I think, and others accountable, you've got to establish your baseline first. And I don't know if this team has. That's what's so confusing about the way they're kind of operating right now. And when people are really down on this team, as I am right now, that's a big part of it, I think. What are you actually trying to do here? And, if it's like we're trying to compete next year, but drafting 2 rookies isn't going to help you do that. Those two things are at odds. If it's like, yeah, let's be a great defensive team. Sure, I'm all for that. Defense can be fun too. Trading for Jordan Poole doesn't make a lot of sense then all of a sudden. That's what's confusing about what they're trying to do right now. This team doesn't feel like they have a direction yet. You don't just start at an identity and then build out from that and be like, we are defense or we are offense, and then we go. I think you've got to work towards that path. You have to go down a path to actually arrive at that identity. And that is not what I would say this team is doing right now. This is a team that is almost like trying to hold up a sign that's like, we are this. And it's like, but you aren't. Before you can do really anything else, you need to figure out, what it is you want to be and then start going down the path to do that. And it needs to remain consistent. Say, we want to be a defensive team. Okay, go down the path of being a defensive team. But then all of a sudden you're going down, and I don't mean to use this to like rag on Jordan Poole or anything. I think he's an awesome guy, actually, and I think he's a great addition to the locker room for the most part. But you don't go down the Jordan Poole path. Like, that's not putting you closer to your stated goal here. And that's what's concerning here about it. You can look at someone like Troy Weaver, who's kind of like shadow running the team for the most part, and say like, well, he does a good job with talent evaluation. And look, he has. In Detroit, he's done a good job. Some of the picks he made are like the obvious picks. Like, I don't know if you get a ton of credit for Cade Cunningham when, in that draft, he was by far and away the top pick. So, like, you should draft him number one. Like, I don't know if you get points for doing the obvious thing, but you know what? Let's give it to him for right now. But it's also those other moves he made, right? His drafting was great there. But it's the other moves he made and trying to build out an identity and all of that, like, that didn't work for that team whatsoever. And you have to have that too. Talent evaluation is only one part of it. And they've struggled with that, I think. So they need to get that part sorted. Like, you're really going to hold Jordan Poole accountable for not playing defense when, like, that's never been him and you traded for him knowing who he is as a player? Like, that doesn't seem unfair to the players. What does that do to your kind of culture with this sort of thing, too? That's not going to go over well. That's how you create problems in the locker room behind all of this. So they need to, before we get to the trade, and it's good that the trade deadline's not here or that they're not blowing it up right now. Let me ask you this. If you do think they need to blow it up, do you trust them to actually figure this out and to do it properly? Even if you draft well, say you get a bunch of picks, something like that. Cool, they draft well, then what? It takes more than just drafting well. You've got to pick the right coach. You've got to bring in the right kind of vets. Those are the type of things that get much harder to do. The Oklahoma City Thunder, they drafted well, but they also picked the right kind of coach for that team. They've done well in the trade market of adding the right kind of veterans like Alex Caruso and when to give up on other players. Even if Josh Giddey's been good last year too. Do you feel comfortable in this front office charting that path? I'm not going to answer that right now, though I think it's kind of obvious where I stand on that. I'm curious what you have to think about that. You can figure out your identity, but you've also still got to build towards that and arrive at it. And right now, the team has been sending mixed signals, I think, internally about all of that. And it's leading to a very bad product on the court. This comes to that level of self-awareness that I've been talking about with this franchise that they just really don't seem to have right now. This team does not really seem to, it's like they live in fantasy land, it feels like. Oh, we're going to be really, really good or whatever. It's like you could see this and be like, no, you're not going to be really, really good. You were a playing team at best. And for them to think they were better than that or to think like, oh, these rookies are so good they'll contribute more. I've been really thrilled with the rookies of Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen. We'll talk about them in a minute. But to think that they were going to help you like immediately win and be a playoff team, I think is not even short-sighted, right? Like just, you're not reading the correct book. You're not living in the correct world. And they struggle with that. And that's concerning. Like you have to live in the reality that we are in right now, not this other one that you wish it was. That goes to a level of accountability on their own parts. And can you have that for yourself in the front office and higher up? And I don't know that this franchise has that level of it right now. Figuring out that identity and then actually working towards that goal, with milestones, KPI, you can put on all the business talk you want with it, but you kind of need some of that here. That's how you fix this. That's how you can then build in accountability, because there is a shared culture, and there isn't a shared culture here right now around some of this. And that's going to be tied to the identity too. And that's what's making this season so absolutely terrible. That's what's making the long-term outlook be concerning, even if you like the two rookies and what they can do. But do you trust this team to figure it out? And I think that is an open question right now around this franchise. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. So coming up next, what can they do to make this season a success or not, or make this season not be as bad as it is? That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Rippling. If you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and just don't work together. That's not SaaS. That's sad. Service as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Rippling is the unified platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance all in one place. They've helped millions of businesses replace a mess of disconnected tools with one system designed to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. What I love about Rippling is how it removes the bottlenecks and busy work that slows teams down. Everything from onboarding to payroll to IT access runs automatically and perfectly in sync. And it's seriously simple to use and gives companies one source for truth for their people, data, and everything they touch. So whether you want to run your entire HR, IT, and finance operation as one, or just fill the gaps in with your software stack, Rippling can do it all. And right now you can get 6 months free when you go to rippling.com/lockedonnba. That's rippling.com/lockedonnba. That's rippling.com/lockedonnba for 6 months free. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 12,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network. So let's wrap up the show. Talking about ways to make this season not a complete failure. I have it wrong if you're looking, there it is, looking at it right there. On the screen on YouTube here. It's not ways to make this season a success. There's not much you can do to make this what I would call a success. There are ways you can make it not a failure, and that's definitely something here, and I think that's what we're looking for when it comes to this Pelicans team. So there's a couple of things. One is it goes to what we just said. Figure out your identity. Use this as an opportunity. Right? I'm tired. I don't really want training camp to be starting in November for next season, but at least you're getting a little bit of that right now. Who are your guys that you trust to be part? So one, it's figure out your identity. What is that going to be? If you are looking at Jeremiah Fears and Derik Queen, okay, great. But what kind of style do those guys need to be in? What other players do they need to be surrounded by? And what does that make your team look like? So if that's figured out, you have a roadmap of what to do going forward and what your identity could be and should be. Maybe it's just offense. Maybe it's not defense. Maybe it's just let's go out and score a bazillion points. I'd love that. That'd be fun to me. Maybe it is defense with those two guys kind of being your creator. Maybe it's a Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic kind of team, with your attacking guard and your facilitating big man, your offensive hub. You can do that. Figure out what it is, what those guys need, and go with it. Seeing Misi start next to Queen last night, good. Do that for a couple games. Then start Queen next to Carlo and see if that's what he needs instead. Get those data points to have a blueprint for the future. And then go and execute on it. That means that if you don't have that first round pick, that's still annoying, but at least you kind of know the type of players you've got to acquire, and you can go out and acquire those guys. That's an important thing. Who from the rest of this roster is going to be on the team? Who responds to the accountability that James Borrego can start putting in tonight's game? Is it a Micah Peavy? He was trying hard. He was scoring. If he's giving you those good minutes on defense and you want to be a defensive team and think that's important, then you play him, and you play him more minutes than somebody that's not doing that. Again, what's going to happen? You lose games. You're already losing games. It doesn't matter. Send a message to some of these players and say, if you can either buy in or you cannot, and it will go get somebody else. That'll work. If you start to figure out who the guys are on the team that will be here next year, you've gotten a jump on some things. If you can rehab Zion Williamson's trade value in some capacity, sure, wouldn't be a bad thing. And I think that would be an important thing too. But those are what this team needs to be focusing on right now. They need to really think about the future and use this as an opportunity to take your lumps. They screwed this season up. Ownership, the front office, has screwed this season up by not making a decision on Willie Green in the offseason that they should have made, and not having the self-awareness on this team to kind of really see where they were going to go and like delude themselves, it feels like, into thinking the wrong things. Take your lumps, acknowledge this season didn't go the way that you wanted. Part of being held accountable is apologizing for it. Learn from it and frankly, just be better. And they can do that. I don't necessarily trust them to do that, but they can do that. And that's going to make this season partially a success, given that we've lowered our expectations from where the season started and what our expectations were. No, absolutely not. But at least now they'll start to see like, oh, okay, we get it. Here's what we need to work on. And I think that's going to be really important for this franchise to try and start to figure out here. That's how you can make this season not a complete disaster, in my opinion. That's what they need to be doing. Build around the rookies, figure out what you need from them, figure out what other assets you can get so that you can build around them even better, but more importantly, have the correct direction. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network. Enjoy the game. I will be there. I will be recapping it tomorrow. We'll then have the Friday show, and then I'll see y'all in a couple weeks from there. But still with y'all the rest of the week. See y'all tomorrow.